We are continuing with our series of lectures called Courageous Parenting, the art of connecting and raising your teenager. And in this third lecture, we are looking at why people do what they do. I'm sure you want to know why your teenagers do what they do. And this lesson is not just limited to why teenagers do what they do, because you'll also actually find it very useful in trying to understand why you do what you do. Let me begin by saying that all human behavior is purposeful. People do what makes sense to them. People filter what they hear through their perspectives and values and come up with their behavior. When I say behavior, I mean the words and their actions that get them what they want. Now I want you to process that statement for a moment. Is this statement always true? Sometimes true? Never true? And as you process it, I'd like you to think about the big ship that was built in the early 1900s, the Titanic. When the word Titanic is mentioned, what comes to your mind? Well, when I ask this question to a classroom of parents, they say, is the ship that sank. And well, that is true. It is a ship and it did sink. But is that our biggest memory of the Titanic? Hardly ever does anybody say the best built ship of its time. And the Titanic was the best built ship of its time, and it did sink. The year was 1912. The month was the month of April. The date was April 14. The Titanic was sailing in the North Atlantic Ocean near the coast of Newfoundland. When you've got a ship that's been well built, you don't give it to an amateur crew, do you? You give it to your best crew. This crew had doubtless sailed through those waters in the past. And so here they were sailing through these waters in the best built ship of its time. They had been told this ship is unsinkable. They were told nothing can sink it, not even God. So they thought. So the ship is sailing through these waters, and guess what? They see little chunks of ice floating in the water. Now that should be a telling sign for anybody experienced in sailing. You see, ice is supposed to melt in water. And when you see ice floating in water, there's one of two things going on. Either the ice has not had a chance to melt, or perhaps the water temperature is so low that the ice will not melt. And so it was, they saw this floating ice, which was a telling sign of something happening, but they didn't pay too much attention to it, because after all, they were in the Titanic. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, there was a nudge on the ship. The kind you feel when your car is hit by another car from the back. The whole ship jolted. Everybody knew that something had happened, but nobody paid too close attention to it, because after all, they were in the Titanic. It could take anything, so they thought. But at 2:20 a.m. on April 15, the unsinkable ship sank. Now here's a question for you. What made the ship sink? We all know it hit an iceberg, but why? There are two main reasons why that ship sank. The first was hidden underneath the surface of the water, completely invisible to the sailors. But the second reason was hidden in the minds and the hearts of the sailors. They believed a lie. They believed the ship could not sink. And so when they saw the signs of the ship about to sink, they could not pay attention to it. Now, friends, two things. Both of them were hidden. Both of them were not visible. What was visible was the floating ice, which was useful to the one who could interpret what was going on. What was visible led to the sinking of the ship, but actually that did not in itself sink the ship, but it gave a connection to what actually caused the ship to sink. Now, when people are going through life, what is visible, namely their behavior, their performance, and their appearance, gives an indication on what's going on underneath in their hearts. And many of us are very keen to judge our children or to judge one another based on appearance and based on performance, with no idea what the appearance and performance is revealing beneath the heart. So you see, for example, a teenager who's obsessed with hair, a teenager who's obsessed with diet. Some of them are eating a lot, some of them are eating and throwing up, some of them are not eating at all. Both of those are obsessed with diet. A teenager who has lost interest in appearance. They used to be very, very tidy, well-groomed. Their room was well taken care of, and suddenly they have lost interest. And you're blaming it on the teenage stage of life. Oh, there is more to it. Remember, nothing horrible happens when a child turns 13. Teenage stage of life is just a stage of life. Nothing horrible happens. The changes that you are seeing are a reflection of what's going on inside the heart of your child. Don't focus on the external. Dig deeper to find out what's going on. What you observe on your teenager: obsession with hair, obsession with diet, loss of interest in their appearance, loss of interest in the way their room looks, a weird haircut, intense competitiveness in sports. The key word here is intense. And the thing is, they are achieving their goals, but they are reacting differently. You find a teenager who is top of their class, well celebrated in school, but they come back home and they are depressed. What is going on? Obsession with sex, obsession with pornography. Key word here is obsession, because competitiveness is something you want and something you desire in your children as they are going through academics and they are going through life. But the key word here is obsession. Your teenager comes home with a weird hairstyle and you're wondering, what's going on? But you haven't trained yourself. You remember from a previous lesson how a person of understanding can draw out this teenager, but you are completely thrown off guard, and you begin to quarrel your teenager based on what you see instead of digging deep down the heart to find out what's going on. When you process with this teenager and when you attack this teenager based on what you see, this will be the equivalent of the Titanic crew trying to pave their way through the waters by removing the floating ice. The floating ice is not the problem. The big problem is hiding underneath. The floating ice is simply an indication of the deep problem. Here's a question for you as you close this first brief session. What issues have you noticed in your teenager recently? In this whole area of appearance and in the whole area of performance, what have you noticed? And how are you reacting to it? Because they give you an indication of what's going on inside, and you need to be a person of understanding to be able to catch that. And in our next session, we'll be talking about what is it that is going on underneath the surface.